All right, let's dive right into this explainer. You know, when we picture July 20th, 1969, we usually think of this flawless, triumphant victory for humanity. But the truth hidden just beneath the surface is a story of terrifying near misses, intense geopolitical pressure, and sheer human ingenuity that you absolutely have to hear to believe.
Section 1. A near-fatal lunar mishap. Because yeah, it actually all started with a terrifying, completely silent mistake right as Neil Armstrong squeezed out of the lunar module to make history.
While awkwardly backing out of that heavy door in his super bulky spacesuit, Armstrong accidentally hit the top of the doorway. Now, because the moon is a vacuum, neither he nor Buzz Aldrin heard a single thing. They had literally no idea that a critical piece of their spacecraft had just snapped right off. And this wasn't just some cosmetic piece of plastic, it was the ascent engine arming switch. Without that switch, they were completely incapable of firing the engines to leave the moon, meaning they would have been stranded there forever. But Buzz Aldrin brilliantly realized that a switch just completes an electrical circuit, so he looked around, grabbed a simple ballpoint pen, jammed it into the broken mechanism to complete the circuit, and literally saved their lives.
Section 2. The Cold War Space Race. So, to understand why they were taking these incredible, life-threatening risks in such fragile machines, we really have to look at the intense rivalry driving them.
Simply put, America was losing the space race to the Soviet Union, and they were losing badly. In 1957, the Soviets totally shocked the world by launching Sputnik, the first artificial satellite. Then, in 1961, they delivered another crushing blow when Yuri Gagarin became the first person in space. The U.S. government was frankly panicking, and this panic prompted a desperate, rapid-fire push that accelerated space exploration at a pace that honestly still seems unbelievable today.
That panic led directly to a massive defining moment. On May 25, 1961, President John F. Kennedy made a seemingly impossible promise. He committed to landing a man on the moon and returning him safely before the decade was out. I want you to really think about the context here for a second. This is 1961. There are no smartphones, there is no internet, GPS literally doesn't exist, and computers take up entire rooms just to do basic math. Yet to make this a reality, JFK poured an additional $7 to $9 billion into the space program, putting an entire generation of engineers to work on one single massive goal.
Section 3. Apollo 11's perilous descent. Because after traveling 400,000 kilometers in a 3 million kilogram rocket, the actual drop to the lunar surface became a pilot's absolute nightmare.
Just as they were dropping toward the moon, at exactly 8:10 p.m., these random numbers flashed across their displays alongside screaming alarms, 12:01 and 12:02. Neither Armstrong nor Aldrin knew what they meant. It turns out, the primitive guidance computer's processing system was completely overloaded. Mission Control down in Houston had to make a gut-wrenching split-second decision. Trusting the system's design to prioritize critical landing functions, they confidently told the astronauts to ignore the alarms and just keep going.
But the computer's overload had already caused a huge problem. It was guiding the lunar module down into a massive crater strewn with huge, deadly boulders. Landing there would have completely destroyed the ship. So at just 150 meters above the surface, Neil Armstrong had to take manual control. He took the stick, flying the Eagle like a helicopter, desperately searching for a smooth patch of lunar dust to set down safely.
The tension here is absolutely palpable, because the mission literally came down to the wire. As Armstrong maneuvered, Aldrin was calling out the fuel levels, 5%. Then came the countdown from Mission Control. They had a mere 30 seconds of fuel remaining when they finally touched down and Armstrong called out, "The Eagle has landed." 30 seconds! They were 30 seconds away from having to abort the greatest achievement in human history.
Section 4. Debunking moon landing myths. You know, given the sheer danger and messiness of the whole mission, it's kind of fascinating that some people still claimed the whole thing was faked.
Let's look at one of the most famous myths, the flag fluttering in a windless vacuum. People look at the photos and ask, well, how is it waving if there's no air? NASA actually knew a normal flag would just hang completely limp and look terrible on camera, so they engineered a horizontal aluminum rod along the top to hold it out. However, the rod got stuck and wouldn't fully extend, which created this ripple effect in the fabric. Plus, those aluminum rods acted like springs, so when the astronauts twisted the pole into the ground, the momentum made the flag sway back and forth in the vacuum. It made it look exactly like it was blowing in a breeze.
Then we have the skeptics who point to the photos and ask, where are the stars? They're ignoring a very basic fact of photography. The moon landing took place during the lunar morning, bathed in incredibly bright, blinding sunlight.
The astronauts were wearing brilliantly reflective white spacesuits. If you take a camera from the 1960s, or honestly even your smartphone today, and take a picture of a brightly lit object with a fast exposure time, the dim background stars simply aren't going to register on the film.
And what about the inconsistent shadows? Theorists argue that shadows pointing in different directions prove there were multiple studio lights, but again, they're missing the context of the environment. The sun wasn't the only light source. The lunar surface itself is highly reflective. It acted as a massive secondary light source, bouncing light back up and scattering shadows everywhere, which creates visual effects that look super bizarre to our Earth-trained eyes.
Finally, people look at the famous reflection in Buzz Aldrin's visor, see Neil Armstrong with empty hands, and wonder who on Earth is taking the picture. Well, the crucial point is that they didn't hold the cameras up to their faces like tourists on vacation. Their bulky gloves made that completely impossible. The cameras were actually mounted directly to the front of their spacesuits, operated by a trigger on the chest. It's just simple, brilliant engineering, not a conspiracy.
Section 5. The True Cost and Legacy. Now, moving past the myths, the actual valid criticisms of Apollo 11 were rooted in very real, serious socioeconomic struggles back on Earth. The Apollo program cost an absolute fortune, $24 billion. In today's money, that is well over $100 billion. While NASA was busy conquering the stars, people were really struggling on the ground. In fact, in 1962, the New York Times published a scathing critique arguing that those exact funds could have been used to build 120 Harvard-sized universities across the country.
The public was heavily divided. Protesters rightly pointed to the raging Vietnam War, income inequality, and poverty, viewing the space program as a colossal waste of funds. But flip to the other side of the equation, and there were massive hidden benefits that shaped the modern world. For instance, NASA's need for tiny, reliable computers for Apollo meant they bought up massive amounts of early integrated circuits. This immense demand drove the price of microchips down by over 90% in just 5 years. That inadvertently birthed the modern computing revolution that powers the very device you're watching this explainer on right now.
Section 6. Returning to the Moon. Despite all those massive leaps forward, shifting budgets brought the Apollo missions to a hard stop in December 1972. But now, after a staggering 50-year gap where no human being traveled beyond low Earth orbit, the tide is finally turning. NASA's new Artemis program is actively gearing up right now. They are aiming to send the first woman to the lunar surface by 2025 or 2026, followed closely by the first person of color before the end of this decade. We are finally going back.
You know, the first time we went to the moon, we went to win a Cold War, and we came back with a microchip. So I'll leave you with this to think about. As we prepare to conquer this magnificent frontier once again, what incredible new discoveries, everyday technologies, and universe-altering mysteries will this next lunar generation bring us?